Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I would like you to all give a warm welcome to our main speaker, Bruce.
Good evening, my name is Bruce. I'm an alcoholic. Can you all hear me all right? You're going to be sorry for that. Actually, I kind of like this. I mean, geez, there's a podium and a dais elevating me and a spotlight, and microphones, 2 microphones, a PA system. And to an alcoholic like me, that adds up to one thing: power. And as an alcoholic, I never had enough power. Then I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and find out that I was powerless. All that did was confirm what I didn't know before. Congratulations to Eric, who got his chip, and to Greg, for 11 years, and Elena for 21. I came in here, I didn't think I could put 21 minutes together, because my track record with alcohol proved it, especially before I got here, I went on a 3.5-month binge that was the mother of all binges. It wasn't a death wish, certainly wasn't a life wish, but what it did equate to was I didn't want to die, but I didn't know how to live, and somehow I was trying to find that little sliver in between, which I think the big book refers to as oblivion. And it didn't start that way. The way it started was actually before I ever picked up a first drink. I'm one of those guys that believes what the big book says about alcohol being nothing more than a symptom. There were causes and conditions. I was raised in a family that was in the CIA. As far back as I can remember, I've been in the CIA. Catholic, Irish, alcoholic. And my parents didn't drink, my grandparents did, and on both sides. And basically what happened is that my mom and dad didn't drink, but they carried the isms. I understand now what I didn't understand before I got here, and I don't blame anybody for anything. They didn't teach me how to drink, they didn't tell me how to drink, they didn't suggest or encourage me to drink. And one of the things I've done during my recovery, before my dad died, I got to do a 9-step on what would later become his deathbed, but I had told him beforehand in different ways that he need never feel responsible for my alcoholism or the life that I led as the result of that, because I went out and I learned those things on my own. And my mom is very elderly, she's 89, she's bedridden, and I constantly try to reinforce that with her, and she says, oh no, I don't know, I could have done a better job. I said, Ma, you couldn't have done a better job. You weren't out there running the streets with me and doing all that crazy stuff and whatever that I was doing, so please don't blame yourself. And the reason I do that is because I have seen a number of instances where parents will assume responsibility for their kid being an alcoholic, and I can't speak for anyone else, but for myself, I wanted to make sure my parents didn't know. But I had underlying causes that I think contributed to me having a lifelong need for relief, without knowing that that's what I needed. And the reason I say that is because when I began drinking, I thought it was alcohol. I look back now, and I was consuming relief. And as a child, I went to 9 schools in 5 states by the 9th grade. No one ever asked me how I felt about moving around all the time, or always being the new kid, or always having really little or no friendships, because I was always too new to develop them. And I spent a lot of time alone, a lot of time lonely, and a lot of time wondering, because something about me sensed that I was different. I was leading a different life, because all the kids, every time I'd get to some new stop along the way, they had always been there. They knew the names of the other kids. They knew where everyone hung out. They knew each other. They knew how to kind of fit in and be at ease with each other and that sort of thing. And I didn't know any of these things. There was 2 grades, the 3rd grade and the 9th grade. I went to 3 schools in separate states in the same grade. 3 sets of kids, 3 sets of streets, 3 neighborhoods, 3 curriculums, 3 sets of teachers, 3 sets of classmates, and 3 schools. And I mean, there was just, you know, my eyes were spinning like wheels on a slot machine. I didn't know what to do. But there was something about that I didn't feel comfortable in being able to admit to anybody. There was something about it inherently that led me to believe that it's this way because there's something wrong with me. I'm stupid, or I don't get it, or I really don't know what it is. And that was one of those things that I guarded from ever discussing with other kids. And on the few occasions that I'd ask somebody, particularly at home, my dad was gone a lot, but I loved him. He was a great guy, and I wouldn't have traded him for anybody. But I'd ask questions, and I'd say, well, how come this, how come that? And I'd get, why do you ask those questions? What's wrong with you that you ask a question like that? So early on, I was of the opinion that I couldn't trust my judgment, and that to ask questions was to risk, not deliberately to have been made to feel stupid, but to certainly feel inadequate. And a lot of these things are piling up. When you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I didn't have a lot of life experience to fall back on. I didn't really realize what was going on, having no friendships that were lasting, no mentors. And I say that because I later on took a look at my dad's childhood, and, you know, like the big book says, and, you know, A Vision for You, obviously we can't transmit something we haven't got. Well, he came from a situation where he was raised in Hell's Kitchen in New York City, and he had a tough upbringing. But he was a great guy, and he did the best he could to let us know that we were loved as kids. And me and my brother and my sister all became alcoholics, and then a lot of substance abuse problems. Fortunately, all 3 of us are sober, which is wonderful. They're back on the East Coast, and they're doing well. Me, I recently relocated out here from Massachusetts, and right away I got the impression that you're cutting-edge people when it comes to alcoholism and recovery. It was the first meeting I stood up and I said, I'm Bruce and I'm an alcoholic. And you sit there and, yeah, well, nobody, no collective gasp, no women shrieked, nobody slumped in their chair. You've pegged me for what I was. And you wouldn't have had any trouble doing that when I was new, because when I was new I was one of those guys, this is not a vision for you poster boy. I was beaten up and many things that were the result of cumulative years of drinking and misliving. What happened, because of all the running around and the need to prove myself and the being lonely and alone and isolated a lot, I desired what I found here in AA, which is fellowship. I was desperate for it. So the last stop that we made, I walked up to a bunch of kids on a Friday night, standing under a street light, and I said, you know, I'd like to hang out with you guys, and I'm new in town. What do you think? Is it okay? It took a lot of courage for me to do that. I mean, I didn't warm up to that stuff. The guy said to me, yeah, you want to hang out with us? Here, do some of this. He stuck a jug in my hand. That could have had turpentine, battery acid, panther pea. It could have had anything in it. I didn't care. I grabbed it, and if this is what it took to find fellowship, you know what? Sign me up. Glug, 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 glug. And I drank that. They had to take the bottle away from me. Prior to that, I insert one little thing. I had been an altar boy for 6 years and loved it. I went almost every day to serve Mass on the altar with the priest, and I learned a foreign language that they don't even speak anywhere in the world anymore. It's called Latin, and that was a challenge. Talk about what an order I can't go through with it. Well, I somehow managed to, and I used to love it. There was a reverence and a closeness to God and a holiness and all the stuff that I had manufactured myself. And I think part of that was instilled in me through parochial schools. That's all I ever did was go to parochial schools, so I got a lot of religion. But by the same token, the flip side of that, I got a lot of God, which means that I had heard of him and I knew who he was. And when it came time to call on him for help on the day that I was absolutely at the end of my rope, I had a God to call on. It wasn't the God of my understanding now. It was still the God of my childhood, but I was so desperate I was even willing to call on that God and ask him for help. But what happened, I went from being an altar boy, and I was a great kid, optimistic, enthusiastic, caring, trustworthy, trusting, desirous of pleasing. I loved helping people and doing things, and it was 12-step work of its own nature because I never asked for anybody to give me anything in return. It was nice to shovel some elderly person's walk. It made me feel good, so I did it. If they wanted to give me 25 cents or something, well, that's fine. Back in those days, 25 cents was, people threw those around like they were manhole covers, because they were worth a lot more than they are now. But the thing is, I went from that type of a kid to a kid who picked up my first drink, had my first drunk, committed my first felony, and experienced my first felony arrest all inside of 12 hours. I don't know if that's a profound change in personality or an erosion of my spiritual foundation. Actually, well, not old enough to really know what I'm getting ready to say. I knew about Santa Claus, wasn't happening. Easter Bunny, wasn't happening. I had some grave reservations about the Tooth Fairy, but one thing's for sure, that night that they drank that alcohol, my magic carpet showed up and I became a believer in magic carpets. And I felt the warmth start up at my head and also at my feet, and then gradually these two came and they met in the middle, and for me it was euphoric. It was utopia. It was what I had been looking for. The rough edges were gone, the burrs were scraped away, the holes were filled in. I was leaking everywhere. Well, now I was plugged up. I could be social, I could be this, I could be that. The self-consciousness was gone, the inhibitions were gone. As far as I was concerned, anything that felt good or made me laugh or helped me make you laugh was okay with me. And that night I really believe I adopted alcohol and later alcoholism as my lifestyle. It changed my circle of friends. One of the things we did during that first felony was we broke into a home, did some serious damage. People wouldn't even know, something I would never have done. But got 7 gallons of homemade wine. I probably would have made good rust remover. But to me it was great because that's what I got drunk on later that night, and every single day, every chance I could, I got drunk on that homemade stuff until it was gone. And I'm the only one to this day that ever knows what happened to it, because the other 3 guys, the next day, they got picked up too. And they all got sent away because I had walked up to a bunch of delinquents, and they had track records. And back in those days, you didn't get 9 chances to prove that you're turning over a new leaf. The second time, you're gone. They called it reform school then. But I had the alcohol, and I remember the first time that I experienced fear connected directly to alcohol was when I had drank about 6 gallons of that stuff over the course of, I don't know, probably a week and a half, whatever it was. And I took a pull on it because I was alone, I was out in the woods, nobody could tell me anything. I'm living the alcoholic's dream world. Don't have to be responsible, don't have to answer to anybody, can say or think or do anything I want, all by myself out in the woods, leaning up against a tree, being cool. But I saw that I was getting ready to break into that last gallon of wine, and suddenly fear took over, and I couldn't put my finger on it. What I could see was the end of my relief, and there wasn't any more in sight, and I got pretty creative when it came to getting alcohol. Wasn't always a fun experience, so I took a job at a VFW cleaning up on Saturdays after wedding receptions. And of course, part of that was to just, here's one that's half full, whump, here's one that's half full, whump. And then, of course, the tricky ones were cans, because there was always some fool, some small-minded, mean-spirited person that would drop a cigarette butt inside the beer can. And I just never knew which one was going to be which. And I didn't really care, because I was still on my mission. And every now and then, boy, I'd get a mouthful of one of those. And willingness to go to any lengths, you pick the cigarette butt out and you drink it anyways. That's the way it was. If you think that's bad, I'll tell you a story. Beware of teenage wisdom when it comes to being a man and drinking like one. And my whole circle of friends changed. I found alcohol. What do I want now? I want other people to drink and think and feel like I do, and have that 3 clicks left to center slant on life that I did. And basically what happened was I found myself, I was getting drunker easier than these other guys, and I'm saying, what kind of a man am I going to be? And one of the kids turned me on to a great household hint. He says, if you drink on a full stomach, pal, you don't have to worry about how much you drink. It takes a lot more to get drunk. Well, I wanted to be a man, because men are judged by how much they can hold their liquor. Your looks off to one side, you'd have been a hell of a man, because you could drink everyone under the table. And it was nice to hear you tonight, by the way. What happened is I said, well, geez, if I want to drink like a man, the best way to do that is to eat something. And we used to drink up in the beach area. And everyone dropped off at this little cottage that we had. I went down the center, and I said, okay, full stomach, more booze, better man, bigger man. So I got a quart of deep-fried battered clams, and I ate that whole thing, and I didn't kind of eat them daintily, because I had to do it from there to the walk back, which was about 400 yards. And I shoveled these things down. Well, then I had 4 quarts of Genesee ale, and those two just collided inside my stomach. I was sick for 3 days. And I remember, I came home, and I was lying in a bed, and the world wasn't the same anymore, and I remember, God, make it go away. Oh, please, God, make it stop. Oh, God, I promise never again. I'll never eat those bad clams again. Here I am defending my drinking. So that became a lifestyle. I went in the military, and if you think your military, gives you reason to sleep safely at night because they're on a case, not my military. I mean, we did some crazy stuff, and I won't get into the details, but I surrounded myself with people that drank like I did. And people that were, let's say, straight-laced, normal, decent people became boring. They didn't have that exciting life that I was looking for, because part of my alcoholism, I was an excitement junkie. I used to love things that were dangerous or thrilling or whatever it was. And I got married to a gorgeous woman from Italy. Wonderful, wonderful accent, beautiful woman. She's going to be a runway model. She had a great career in front of her. She had everything going for her except one thing. She fell in love with me. And other than that, that was one of the great regrets that I carried for a long time, is what I did to her in our marriage. Because I had been groomed to become the vice president of a large corporation, which, had I kept the stocks that were issued to me as part of the deal, I'd be worth about $2.5 million right now. And trust me, I'm not. But I chose to become a criminal. I wanted excitement, and I wanted living on the edge, and I wanted danger, and I wanted dangerous people. The 70s for me, that's what it was. I got, and of course, my alcoholism is progressive, so is my desire to excel at things that were dangerous, or in my case, criminal. So I ended up running with some heavy, heavy hitters, and I was all over the country, and we were bringing in stuff from the Middle East. We were bringing in stuff from South America, Central America, West Coast to the East. I was all over this country doing things. I was a big-time moneymaker for guys. And what happened is that she was scared to death of what would happen, and I dragged her through that. And she had to leave for her own mental and emotional survival, let alone could very well have easily been her physical survival. And what that did is our son, who I worship the ground he walked on, I still do. Great kid, except now he's a man. Kids have a way of doing that. They have a way of growing up, and they're not small anymore, and you can't sit with them on your knee and all that stuff, but I did get to do it for a while. Um, you know, it didn't occur to me that if she leaves, he goes with her. And I was so caught up in the stuff that I was doing. She was gone 2 days before I even noticed she was gone. I don't know if that's called self-centeredness, but it sounds like a... So I ended up getting sent away. I spent 2.5 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I pled guilty to it just to squash the investigation. And it would have brought on a lot of misfortune for people around me, innocent people, simply because they knew me. And the only way I could squash that was to plead guilty, and I could have picked up 30 years, and unfortunately I didn't. I got 12, and I got those run together. I ended up spending 2.5 years away. And it was during that time in prison that I made a decision that I didn't want to live like that anymore, but I didn't know I was an alcoholic. And I didn't know that I had other problems as well. So when I got out, I stopped the criminal lifestyle, but I continued. The first thing I did when I got out was to celebrate. What do? You're an alcoholic, you celebrate. You're victorious, you beat the system, you beat them, you're free, you triumphed. And what happened was I got drunk, and I opened up the door for 7 more years of suffering. And I dragged a few people through that. And when it came time where I couldn't live like I was living anymore, mostly because I couldn't stand feeling like I was feeling anymore, because I worked right up until the day that I went in treatment. And I know there's people that have problems with God, fear of God. Don't talk to me about God. Well, anybody who may be here, who may ultimately hear this tape, I want to touch briefly on my experience with God. I was one of those people who felt I had fallen so far from grace, who was so unredeemable and unforgivable in my behavior, in my treatment of other people, in my manner of living, my personal behavior, my morals, my ethics, and every other thing. I broke almost all the 10 Commandments. There's a couple yet that I really didn't. Although I was killing myself and didn't know it. So I guess I was working on that one. I couldn't stand the thought of being me anymore. And it was on Christmas Eve, 1986, when I was up with some friends going to pull an all-nighter, and something happened that night that was so repulsive and so disgusting to me that I said, I'm out of here, I gotta go. What are you doing? I gotta go. And I took off. And it was 11:30 at night, and I was loaded, and I drove loaded, and I drove to a Catholic church, and I walked into midnight mass, and I got about 10 rows back, and I'm watching the service, and I'm trying to just even believe that I'm here.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
And I'm looking at a life-size crucifix that's hanging over the altar, and I stared at it and stared at it, and I began to weep. And tears came down. And I remember looking at that thing, and I couldn't believe, because now I'm getting back to those religious roots, I couldn't believe I had lived the way I had. And then for anybody that's not Catholic, in Catholicism, communion is the center, the heart and soul of Catholicism. It's where you get the host, and you drink the wine. And when it came time for that part of the service, I felt myself absolutely uncontrollably compelled to get up and to start going toward the front of the church with everyone else that was going to do that. Loaded. Any theologian, any religious, whatever, would consider that to be about as blasphemous an act as there is, or sacrilegious. And I remember easing along with the press of people, and I'm staring at that crucifix up there. And I'm saying, I can't believe I'm going to do this. I can't believe I'm going to do this. And then I began to cry. No more weeping. And I'm looking at that, reflecting on my religious upbringing, reflecting on my life, and I'm saying, all the things that you've given me, that God of my understanding, the parents, the family, the wife, the child, the jobs, the situation, whatever. And look what I've done with it. And the way I'm going to say thanks is to slap you across your face on your birthday. And something inside of me broke when that happened, but I went ahead and did it. And on the way back, instead of that angry, wrathful, punishing God that I believed would not forgive me because he couldn't or wouldn't, instead of saying, you know, you've just offended me once too often, and this time it's been really grave, and you're dead. Instead of that happening, on the way back down the aisle, I said something I had never said before. I said, I can't live like this anymore. I just can't. I had said that hundreds of times, but then I added something else to it. I said, I can't live like this anymore. I can't stand it. I've got to get help. And that was the big first step that, without realizing it, I admitted I was powerless over alcohol. My life was unmanageable, and I had to get something greater than me that would restore me to sanity. And I was willing to turn my will and my life over to whatever that was. That is not a condemning God that allowed me to live through that. I went back to the house that night, and I'm still loaded, and I got some more cutting-edge people that work in treatment centers, and I said, I'd like to rent a room. And they said, you want to rent a room? I said, yeah, I'd like to rent a room. And they said, would you like one with a view? And I said, do you have any? How about a corner room? They said, sure. You got insurance? And I said, yeah, I got insurance. So I gave them the information. They called me back about 10 minutes later and said, okay, you're all set, come on down. I said, well, wait a minute now, let's just take it easy. I'll be down in a week. Oh, in a week. Well, actually, I did get down in a week. My sobriety date is January 3rd, 1987. The reason that it took me a week is because I had to figure out which lies I was going to tell to which people so that I could cover my tracks and they'd never know what was going on. Ooh, I'm sorry. Got some things I want to say, man. Someone stuck a binky in my mouth and I can't say them. It's beautiful. But the point is I went in, I was too ashamed to admit to anybody. I didn't know what I was going to do. I remember walking up the steps to Leavenworth Penitentiary when I got sent away, and the same feeling I had walking up the steps to Leavenworth Penitentiary was the same feeling that I had walking into that treatment center. And I didn't know if I was going to do any better in the treatment center than I did in Leavenworth. But what happened is I got in there, I plugged into what was necessary. I was going to counseling sessions, I was going to all the groups, and I was going to the movies and all this stuff, and people were telling me, you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay. You know, and it's a lot of rhetoric, and I wasn't really buying it. But what happened in there is a panel came in from AA, and somebody in that panel, as I was a newcomer, and they said, you know, you're going to get out of here someday. What are you going to do when you have to go back out? And it was like they had shot me in the stomach with a cannonball. Because I didn't know. I knew there was danger. I knew there was problems. I knew there'd be temptation. I knew there'd be opportunity. All these things that would be in my way in terms of my sobriety. And I said, you know what, I don't know. At which point that individual said, we've got what we call Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you really want to get sober and you're serious about doing business with your sobriety, we can help. And we're every place, and we can meet, and you can come and you can have a place to be with people just like you, people who think like you, who feel like you, who've got stories like you. And I took a look, well, maybe not like you, pal, but stories. And what happened was, that was the first glimmer of hope I got. And before I got out of the treatment center, I knew which meetings I was going to do, and I went to 2 of them the first day I got out, and for the next 2 weeks I went to 3 a day. I thought I could go back to work and just kind of treat it like, well, there's another speed bump, I'm all set, here we go. And it wasn't like that at all. What it was is I was so rattled and so just emotionally distraught and mentally warped and all the rest of it that I needed to go to meetings and just keep going to meetings. And I had a company car, and if they wanted me to go back, and I said, geez, I can't, I'm not ready yet. They could have pulled the car, and now I'm walking. I look back at that now, and I think that's called willingness to go to any lengths, because I was willing to give them their car, and I was going to walk the meetings. This was the dead of winter in Massachusetts, where it's not exactly the most accommodating weather for walking. What happened was they said, all right, well, you know, call us when you're ready. So I called in a couple of weeks, but by then I had a lot of meetings under my belt. I went back, and about 2 weeks after I was there, I quit that job because everybody in the place was getting loaded. So I went to another place where they all got loaded. There was 43 people in the company. It was myself and 2 other people that didn't get loaded on the job. They'd be drinking, they'd be laying out lines of cocaine, you'd see people up back smoking pot, people yanking on nips, people in and out of the bathroom. And it was not by chance, about 2.5 years later, that multi-million-dollar corporation went right down the tubes. You know, you just can't stay afloat when what you're floating on is booze. And that's what happened, but that wasn't my problem. An interesting thing happened. I continued to go to my meetings. I moved up pretty quickly in that company. I took an enormous amount of battering of one type or another because they found out, number one, that I wouldn't drink or drug with them. And then they found out that not only did I wouldn't do it with them, I didn't do it at all, and that I hadn't, that now I was in some sort of program. And then they found out that it was AA. I was ostracized. I was shunned. I mean, every day, 5 days a week, they'd send out for lunch, and every day, geez, we forgot to ask you, sorry, you'll have to go get your own. This type of stuff, a little nasty, and then people wouldn't talk to me, or I wouldn't get calls returned, none of the above. And at the same time, I realized that I had a sponsor because it was important to me to have someone to talk to, and I locked into a guy early on, because I was sick and tired of my own company and my own advice and my own wisdom and my own whatever. And he said, you know, when you decided to get sober, you took a stand. Because of the environment that you're in now and the treatment you're getting from those people, you're going to have to make a stand. Not to be a crusader. We don't do that in Alcoholics Anonymous. But you're just going to have to stand your ground. You're going to have to make a decision every time you get shunned. You want their way or do you want your way? Which is our way. And I stayed on that job for a little over 2 years. And I would say about 15 people during the course of those 2 years, one by one, would call me aside and say, let me see you for a minute. And some of them were some of my worst critics. They say, when you stopped drinking and all that stuff, what did it feel like? What was it like? And I got the opportunity to do some 12-step work. And there's a couple of people that are still sober. I didn't do it. Sponsorship is a huge, huge part of my recovery. I've always had one. And I still have one, and I still do it. Because if I don't give it away, I'm not going to keep it. There's something about giving it away that feels good. So that helped me in my recovery, because every day I had to reinforce my commitment to my recovery a dozen times. And I continued to go to meetings. The first sponsor that I had was 25 years sober when we met. When I was 2 years sober, he passed away, 27 years sober. He was great with the nuts and bolts of day-to-day living and early recovery, especially the slogans. Easy does it, one day at a time, live and let live, think, and all the stuff that you see in a lot of halls up in the banners. He wasn't that strong on the steps, but by the same token, he helped me, and he was somebody that I could talk to. And the first time I asked him to sponsor me, he looked me right straight in the eye and he says, no. I said, I thought you old-timers are supposed to be tough. What's the matter? You don't want to sponsor the Terminator? But he gave me his phone number, that old fool, and I took it home. And I says, you don't want to sponsor me, huh? Well, I'll show you. Famous alcoholic battle cry, I'll show you. I picked up the phone and called him. And the dopey answered the phone. And we talked. And this became a regular thing. So about a year after this, I'm sitting with him and I'm saying, I'm wired up now because I know what I'm going to do. So we're out having dinner one night and he says to me, what's the matter? You look like you got something in your mind. I says, well, I kind of do. He says, what is it? What did they do to you now, my son? And I said, well, actually, it's nothing that anybody did to me. I got something I got to ask you. He says, what's that? I said, will you be my sponsor now? And he looked at me. And he says, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. Do you call me all the time? Yeah. Do we talk a lot? Yeah. Do you ask me questions? Yeah. Do I answer them all? And I said, no. Because sometimes never mind that, get over here. You're wandering off in the woods. Stay over here and stay centered. And I said, but other than that, yeah, you answer them. And he says, do we go to lunch together? I says, yeah. He says, how about meetings? Yeah. He says, so what do you want, a wedding band and a marriage contract? What do you think this is? See, so that gave me my clue that, okay, now I know. And the other thing I discovered, I was staying sober. I'd have all kinds of questions. I'd have all kinds of stuff. The mentor that I had wanted all my life, I now had in this man. I lost this man and my dad together. And I don't know which one I missed the most when he passed, which one the loss was the greater. And believe me, I loved my dad. After that, I knew the value of having a sponsor, someone to talk to, someone to give me some direction. But by the same token, I had sort of gone back to feeling like a newcomer. You know, restless, irritable, discontent, thin-skinned, you know, and I couldn't understand what was wrong because I was doing probably 12 meetings a week. And there was a couple of people that asked me if I'd help them out. So what I could do, I did. But this guy was a terminator. He was a big book terminator. And he said, tell me about step one. And I says, okay. And I told him. He said, oh, that's all right. What about step two? Where do you stand with that? And I told him. And he says, all right, well, how about step three? And I told him. He says, okay. How about step four? What do you mean? I sounded like Beavis and Butthead. And he says, you're going to do what I say or I'm not going to be your sponsor because I don't waste my time on people that aren't willing. Oh, so what do I have to do? Therein made the difference. This man showed me how to do step four. At that point, I had become a published author, crime novelist. I said, but they made a book out of a big chunk of my four-step inventory. I don't have to go there, do I? He says, oh, yes, you do. He says, because you didn't do it the way it's laid out in the big book. I said, what? He says, the big book. And I thought the 12 steps, as they're listed there, were on pages 59 and 60. I didn't know that the 12 steps in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous start on page 30 and end on page 103, chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That is the AA program, and he said, you're going there with me, but I'm going to stick with you, and you're going to be okay. This time, when this man looked me in the eye and said, you're going to be okay, for the first time in my life, someone said that, and I believed it. And up until that moment, no one had ever said to me, you're going to be okay, in a meaningful way. And therefore, up until that point in my life, I had never believed I was going to be okay or could be. And then he took me through the steps, starting right with the very inside blank page, because he said, that's about how much you know about recovery. All of it's right there on that blank page. And I began my journey through recovery. And we went through the inventory, and I got all the deep, dark secrets out. And, you know, by the time I was done, I had about 250 resentments and about 300 fears and all this associated baggage. I had more baggage than American Airlines. And I used to be one of those guys that, especially with the circles I traveled in, I mean, you know, I've learned not to talk about certain things from the podium because about a month ago, I mentioned something at the podium, and at the end of that meeting, a guy come up to me after everyone left, and he said, I want to talk to you about such and such a thing. And I said, what are you talking about? And he began to grill me, and I just understood that something was wrong here, and a lot of questions. And he says, you know, I've been BS'd by some of the best in the business, but I think you're the biggest one of the bunch. And I said, well, I don't recall saying anything that's a lie tonight. He said, well, I think you're lying to me now, and now I want to talk to you. Boom! Justice Department, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now we're going to talk. And I said, now you're going to get lost. But I've learned that was a whole new definition of discretion. Okay, so I don't get into too much. When I got sent away, it was for everything and whatever. I pled guilty to a bunch of stuff I didn't do, but you know, In any event, I went through all of that stuff, and I went through the secrets, and I went through the sexual inventory, and I went through who I hurt and how I hurt them, and you know, all of the steps. I needed to take a look at that. I was a guy that said, you know, always my battle cry, I'm not afraid of anything that walks on two legs. Well, here's this long list of fears. You afraid of spiders? Well, what do you mean? What if you wake up and you pull the covers up and you get a bed full of spiders? What are you going to do? I'm going to put them on the list. Anger. Well, I mean, yeah, everybody. No, not just people. What about things? I said, well, I don't know. He said, what about the prison system?
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom?
What about the U.S. government? What about the IRS? What about the registry? What about the court system? What about? So he had to point these things out. I needed to be shown this stuff, but what happened in doing that, it dug out the stuff that used to bother me. And I got a lot of good work done then, and it is a lifelong journey. But there was a lot of character defects that I didn't realize I had. Again, it had to be pointed out to me. I am thoroughly convinced at this point in time that there is no way in the world I could ever do this alone, getting sober, staying sober, enjoying it, and then wanting to pass it along. I needed to be shown this program. And what happened to me was this man did it, and he passed away 27 years sober after being my sponsor for 8.5 years. I got another guy, and he just turned 27 years sober just before I moved out here. He's had 2 guys commit suicide on him, so every time we meet, I'd say, how you doing, pal? How you feeling? He'd say, I'm feeling pretty good. How are you feeling? Oh, I'm pretty good. He said, well, good. Looks like we're going to have a good day. And he's still alive with 27 years, coming up on 28. Well, he will this year, God willing. He's an older man, and they're wonderful. But what's happened is some of the, you know, I got to make friends with my mind. I got to make friends with that God I ran away from, that I was afraid of. I found out he's very forgiving, very kind and compassionate. He understood that I didn't understand. He understood that I was sick, not bad. I did some bad things. Society said so, my wife said so, people said so, but they were bad because I was sick. I didn't know how to do the nicer part of life. I didn't know how to get there. It was like standing at the foot of the Empire State Building and saying, wow, I bet the view's just great up there, and not knowing how to get up to where the view is. AA showed me how to get up to where the view is, which is wonderful, the steps and sponsorship and meetings and sharing and literature. And you know, I talk to that God now. We're pals. I believe he loves me. I know I love him. Took 14 years sober for the first time in my life to have more desire and a greater confidence and trust in God's will than in mine. There is no greater gift I've discovered anywhere than for me to experience that. I don't trust my will by itself anymore. I pray for guidance a lot. Step 11, knowledge of his will for me and the power to carry it out just for a day. It's okay to make plans. I just don't etch them in titanium steel anymore, or try and force them to happen. Sponsorship, yeah, I work with a lot of guys. My 10th year in sobriety was the 10th year of my life. Not the 10th year of my sobriety. The toughest year of my life was the 10th year. I never experienced, I lost 7 people in a matter of months, starting off with my best friend who gave me my medallion, to 2 close friends who went out and died like that. One of them was 2.5 years sober, one was a year sober. Then I lost my soulmate. Then I lost a family member. Then I lost somebody else, and then at the end of the year, somebody else. And I didn't know what was going on, but it made me reinforce my commitment and recommit myself and rededicate myself to my recovery every day. So what it's done is, you know, you hear that old saying, whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Well, it made me stronger because I stayed close to AA. I listened to tapes, I worked with others, the guys I sponsored didn't have to worry about whether they had a sponsor or not. They heard from me every day, and I called them. I figured I could listen to them or I could listen to the committee. I could listen to the recovery tapes or I could listen to the committee. And I don't like crowd noise. So what happened was, I've had some wonderful things happen in recovery. That son that basically was taken away from me because of my lifestyle when my wife had to leave, at a year and a half sober, shortly after my dad passed away, it became obvious that he wasn't in a situation that was in his best interest. And he ended up coming to live with me. And he stayed with me for 7.5 years. That was wonderful. And he got to give me my 10-year medallion. And when he gave me that 10-year medallion, he was in the middle of presenting it, and he continued to look, and there was a big book sitting on the secretary's table right near where the podium was. And he kept looking at it. I could tell it was a distraction, and people were wondering, what is it, what is it? And finally, he just grabbed it, and he says, you know, this book right here, he said, I'm not an alcoholic, I don't drink, I never did drugs. He said, but the stuff that's in here, he says, has changed me. And the reason that it did is because I was always active in the program. And guys would call me, and I'd call my sponsor, and he'd be privy to conversations that were taken on telephone, conversations between me and other people in the program. He and I also sounded very similar on the phone. And I can remember one night when his girlfriend called up and said, hi, it's me, how about, I said, what? Oh, Mr. Fitz, I was just kidding. And then, of course, there's guys that would call me up that I'd sponsor, and, you know, they're the alligators that be at the rear end, and they'd be on fire, and, oh, man, I got you, glad I got you home, blah, 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 blah. And it turned out it was my son. Well, where's your dad? Well, he's not out right now. Well, you'll do when they blow it all over him. But see, what happened is the guys in Alcoholics Anonymous that were calling my house gave this kid the first glimpse of him being worth something to somebody somewhere other than me and other family members for the first time in his life. Now, people can tell me all they want that I'm a good guy and that I'm this and I'm that, but until I get it from my head to my heart, it's still, the jury's still out. I don't even like that word, jury. That's not, especially where it comes to me. And if you put a grand jury, that doesn't make me feel grand. That's how I got sent away. I pled the Fifth Amendment 43 times. But I wanted to do that with my sponsor when he was hearing my fifth step, but he wouldn't let me. He said, we don't work like that around here, pal. You're getting up off all of it. And he didn't judge me or condemn me, and that was the part that made me feel like I was a whole decent human being. So I work with others. The God of my understanding is a friend. My ex-wife, who was the last one that I consciously had on my list of amends to make, she took me 13 years because it says in there, except when to do so would injure them or others. I didn't want to injure her. But I sent her a letter. 2 days later, she called back, and I ran it by my sponsor. It took me 2 weeks to write 2 pages to get them just right, because I wanted it to be right. And every day I'd pray before I'd write. And she called, we talked. A couple weeks later she came over. We sat and talked like old pals for an hour and a half, all alone in the house. No yelling, screaming, no hanky-panky. She's married. And it wasn't about that. But the beauty of it is that I called our son to set up him coming to visit me on Christmas, and he was already at her house. And I called over there, and I said, how you doing? And he says, good, Dad, I'll be over in about an hour or so. I said, great, put your mom on the phone. And there was silence. And I said, go ahead, put her on the phone. He says, you sure? And I said, yeah, don't worry about it. And she came on the phone, and that lady and I wished each other from the bottom of our hearts a Merry Christmas for the first time in 24 years. That's the power of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the power of doing the steps, including 8 and 9. That's the power of acknowledging my wrongdoing. And it wasn't easy. And I pray before I do most any major thing that I can think of. Some things I can't pray, I don't have that time, but if I have an opportunity, I really do believe in that 11th step that 86 and 87 in the big book talks all about guidance. So I'm here, and I wasn't supposed to be. I was asked to come here and do this afternoon at, I don't know, 4 o'clock or so, thereabouts. And I never say no, unless I've got something else that I have to do, AA related. But it's wonderful to be able to come here and do this. I'll just close with just a thought. I learn a lot of things from the literature, from other people, but also from nature. And a lot of people have heard about the Dead Sea, that huge body of water in the Middle East. It's got so much alkali and chemicals and all sorts of stuff in it that you can't drown in it. You dive in it, boom, you go right to the surface. There's no living thing in it, no fish, no shellfish, no anything, not even microbiological organisms can live in it because it's just so unlivable. And the common misnomer about the Dead Sea is that it's dead because it's got all those chemicals and stuff in it. And there's no raging water, there's no water, no fresh water. Every day, the reality is that millions and millions of gallons of fresh water pour into the Dead Sea. The reason that the Dead Sea is dead is because nothing flows out of it. It gives nothing away. So thanks for the opportunity for me to come here and give something away. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.